Welcome to Center Stage.
Bringing you the best from the Center for Inquiry, a non-profit organization that seeks to foster a secular society based on science, reason, freedom of inquiry, and humanist values.
Presenting lectures and events at its headquarters in Amherst, New York, and in New York City, Washington, Los Angeles, and elsewhere. There's always something thought-provoking and controversial on stage at some Center for Inquiry.
Join us now on Center Stage. Welcome to Center Stage. I'm Lauren Becker, Vice President for Outreach at the Center for Inquiry. Today on Center Stage, a presentation on astronomy, physics, and reason, featuring theoretical physicist and best-selling author Lawrence Krauss.
And I'm Tom Flynn, editor of Free Inquiry magazine. On October 9th, 2010, the Council for Secular Humanism presented the fourth session of its 30th anniversary conference, Setting the Agenda, Secular Humanism's Next 30 Years, at the Millennium Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles.
The fourth session was a luncheon featuring Dr. Krauss, who is Foundation Professor, Director of the Origins Initiative, and co-director of the Cosmology Initiative at Arizona State University. He is introduced by Tom Flynn.
And now the luncheon presentation by Lawrence Krauss.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and see so many friends, actually. I hope the music I had on earlier, which was appropriate, I thought, to the talk, was not too loud. I'd like to begin with apologies, and I will apologize. Well, first I'll just say I'm really happy it was a good meal. So this luncheon isn't a total loss. You can decide. I'm also going to apologize because I'm not going to talk about science, which I like to talk about. I'm going to talk about science, but I'm not going to talk about the science that I do or have been thinking about so much. I want to talk about, well, in particular, I was asked to talk about something else, and I usually take those things seriously. Not always. And I want to talk about some ideas that have been floating around in my own mind, and this will be the first time I'll have talked about them in this context, so we'll see if they make any sense. I have a quote from one of my favorite authors, Jacob Bronowski, from a book that I carry around with me everywhere. It's in my backpack, and even when my bag was stolen a month ago with everything in it in Seattle, I was able to fly back across the world when someone discovered the bag recovered, with a computer and everything gone, but my Bronowski book was still there. I at least thought maybe the thieves would be enlightened, but they weren't. But this is a quote from a book called Science and Human Values, which strongly needs to be rewritten, and in fact, I'm rewriting it. I'm planning to finish a book on that subject. I put it aside to do another book, which is based on a talk I gave in Los Angeles a year ago, thanks to my friend Richard Dawkins, who's here. And when that's done, I'll be talking about some of the stuff I'll talk about here. So you're guinea pigs. Anyway, that's the quote will come back several times because I think it's extremely important. It's just the simple fact that whether you like it or not, the world is based on science, and you better get used to it. So the title of my talk, I decided to title it, it's going to be Science, Human Values, and the Fallacy of Spirituality. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So here's this quote from Bronowski, but the most important part of the quote is the one I didn't put in here, and it's the next sentence, which I think is of vital importance. Okay? And this make-believe game might cost us what we value most, the human content of our lives. So it's not just that science is important for our society and our economic well-being, but for our humanity. And I think we too often ignore that fact or don't recognize that, in fact, that science is really an essential part of our humanity, and I will argue more essential than many other things that are often promoted in that regard. Now, I was asked to talk about some things that are wrong, and in particular about some funding agencies that are problematic. And I want to illustrate the problem with an advertisement on the web from an organization that I've been an officer of, the American Association of Advancement of Science. I was in charge of their physics division for a while. And the AAAS has had since 1995 a subgroup called the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion. It doesn't really matter if you can read all this, as long as I can read it. That's what counts. I'll read it out to you. Now, that organization began, and then happily, due to a number of people, and I'm pleased to say I was part of the group, we squashed it. And it went away, but it never quite went away. And then it was reinvigorated and reopened with a new director this last year, and there was a big event called Re-envisaging the Science and Religion Dialogue on June 16th in Washington. There was a big event to herald the opening of this with new funding from an organization, as I'll talk about, called the Templeton Foundation. I don't come here to bury them or praise them, but you'll see, I'll talk about them. In any case, so here's the organ. You can actually watch it on the web, and it's got this new officer named Jennifer Wiseman. I'll talk about her. And here are the panelists. So the first one is William Phillips, a friend of mine who's a Nobel laureate in physics, and also an evangelical Christian. David Anderson, who's founder and lead pastor of Bridgeway Community Church, and Howard Smith, who's an astrophysicist who wrote a book on Let There Be Light, Modern Cosmology, and the Kabbalah. A new conversation between science and religion. So what's wrong with that picture right away? First thing that's wrong with this picture, it's a dialogue on science with three religious people, three religious scientists, and who are not, therefore, representative of the scientific community. And it's pretty hard, as I'll talk about, to have a dialogue if you don't have representative people. It gets worse. Jennifer Wiseman is the new director. Now let's learn about Jennifer Wiseman. Okay, here she is again. She happens to be a NASA scientist, so she's a real scientist. And I looked her up, and I looked her Wikipedia page up, and I find she's a fellow of the American Scientific Affiliation, which is an evangelical group that was established with the credo, I believe in the whole Bible as originally given to be inspired, the inspired Word of God. Since God is the author of the book, as well as the creator and sustainer of the physical world around us, I cannot conceive of discrepancies between statements in the Bible and the real facts of science. This is the leader, this is the head of the AAAS Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion. I'm glad to hear a murmur go through the crowd. There are other events that this group runs. I went on their webpage this morning when I was preparing this talk, and found, for example, they have a big event, the Evolution Dialogue, Science, Christianity, and the Quest for Understanding. A unique and extraordinary resource presents in plain language and in under 200 pages a new conversation on evolution and Christianity. It's a description of the development of evolutionary theory from before Darwin to the present, the rich and complex historical interaction of evolution and Christianity. Richard, it's very rich and complex, wouldn't you think, that interaction of evolution and Christianity? It is, but in a negative way. And accounts of the nature of science and of the Christian approach to understanding. So this is the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, not the American Association for the Advancement of Religion. And so, what's wrong with that picture? Here are the things that I think are wrong with that picture. First, dialogue is not the same as endorsement. One can herald, and I believe it's appropriate to say, look, it's great to see the AAAS reaching out to broader communities. Because one of the problems of trying to explain science to many members of the public is that they view science as the enemy of religion. And therefore, they won't even listen. And so it's appropriate, I think it's particularly appropriate to try and reach out to different communities and try and convince them that science is actually the way the world works. And so there's no problem with reaching out. The problem, however, is that if you reach out and you misrepresent science in the effort to reach out, then you're doing everyone a disservice. And to present a dialogue by only presenting members of the scientific community who are strongly religious is to fully misrepresent science in an extreme way. In fact, it's inappropriate to suggest that science endorses any religious worldview. I particularly was offended by that Evolution and Christianity forum that the AAAS seems to have produced a book about. And one should recognize that religion is a vibrant force in society. But why does that require a dialogue with it? Why not a dialogue with astrologers? or Republicans. But the thing is that really upsets me is that presenting some scientists as religious is irrelevant. Some scientists are sadomasochists. Some root for the National League. Some don't like baseball. Who cares? You will find scientists that do everything, and I find it offensive to present scientists and say, look, we have religious scientists, and therefore science and Christianity are absolutely compatible because they're Christian scientists, like my friend Bill Phillips. Well, we all know that humans are humans, and more or less scientists, most of them are human, and that humans are perfectly capable of believing in two completely inconsistent ideas at the same time. And so to represent that and herald that as an example of some intellectual unification is incredibly inappropriate. Okay. The other thing that's wrong with this picture is the groups that support this, but one of them I want to talk about is the John Templeton Foundation. So let's talk about the Templeton Foundation, which is really, by the way, what I was asked to talk about. I don't want to spend the whole time talking about them because for various reasons. The first thing you should know about the John Templeton Foundation is they're very wealthy. In fact, it's not quite yet a $2.5 billion endowment, but once Sir John's estate is finalized, it will be $2.5 billion. It's a little over $1 billion now, making it one of the top 25 foundations in the world in terms of endowment. As you know, they're famous for endowing the Templeton Prize, which is the largest prize in the world, defined always to be larger in monetary value than the Nobel Prize, because Sir John felt that issues in religion and spirituality were more important, in a sense. They were the most important goal of humanity, and therefore the prize should always be more highly endowed. It used to be called the Prize for Progress in Religion. Like many things in the Templeton Foundation, the prize has changed names many times. Progress in science and religion, whether it's science and religion or progress in science and spirituality. The important thing is that most of the people, in fact, in recent times, all the people who've won are either scientists or philosophers. And I remember when my good friend, Paul Davies, who's now my colleague at Arizona State, won in 1996, I wrote a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Education decrying the many things about the way the Templeton Foundation was impacting upon science. And I pointed out that I know Paul's books, and I value Paul as a physicist and a popularizer of science, but if his books represented the greatest progress in religion and spirituality, it did not reflect well on religion and spirituality. Because all the entire content was to have the word God in the title. The original goal of Sir John was a humble approach to learning. Sir John was a very interesting and multifaceted character. He was very interested in all the world's religions. He was a Christian, but quite an interesting character. By the way, when I wrote my piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education, I was in Europe at the time when it came out, and I came back and there was a FedEx envelope to me from the Bahamas, which I guess is where his foundation was for tax reasons. And all there was a book from Sir John to me. He'd read the piece, and it was a book of quotations from Jesus. And inside he inscribed, he said, "Dear Lawrence, God loves you and I love you too." And I sent him the physics of Star Trek and said, "Live long and prosper." But it was the original. If you read the original wording, it was designed to foster an expanded vision of God that is informed by recent discoveries about the nature of the universe. Sir John actually, I agreed with him completely about one thing. Sir John felt that people should not derive their morality from 2 or 3 or 4,000-year-old manuscripts by people that didn't know anything about nature. That is, I think many of us in this room can share, and it's certainly a valid thing. What he felt, however, was that, because he was deeply religious, that in fact people should be informed about God by science. And the best route to God was science. So his motivation was in some sense good. He felt science describes nature, and since nature is determined by God, science will reveal the mind of God. And as he said here, the main purpose of the John Templeton Foundation is to encourage the top 0.1% of people, and thereby encourage all people to think that progress in spiritual information is possible, desirable, can be done, and will be done. And that is the misplaced goal, in my opinion, of the foundation. Well-intended, but misplaced. The early programs of the foundation, well, let me list some of them. A $2.3 million grant for the Flame of Love project, a program in interdisciplinary science of godly love. I was very embarrassed when I was the chair of the physics department at Case Western Reserve University that one of my colleagues at the medical school, who's now on the trustee of the foundation, Stephen Post, ran an institute for the study of infinite love out of the medical school, Templeton funded, out of the medical school at Case, which is a very prestigious medical school. They funded an institute for spirituality and health. And when I got involved, actually what caused me to write the piece in 1996 was that they announced a $1 million program to find evidence of universal purpose to the cosmos. Partly motivated by my own work in the fact that many of the parameters of cosmology were fine-tuned, appeared to be unusually fine-tuned. And so they launched a fine-tuning initiative, which is okay to fund for science, but the purpose of the fine-tuning initiative was to find evidence of universal purpose to the cosmos. And I'd written extensively how the fine-tuning did not present that at all, and still doesn't. In fact, as an aside, so I'll give a little bit of physics, I guess, because I can't help it. The fact that at least one of the major constants in nature is fine-tuned for the existence of life is evidence, if anything, of a kind of cosmic natural selection. Just as evidence that bees can see the colors of flowers so they can get nectar is not evidence of fine-tuning, as you'll discover in any of Richard's beautiful books. It's evidence of the fact that if they didn't, they wouldn't be around and they wouldn't procreate. It's not too surprising to find that we find ourselves in a universe in which we can live. Okay. They also funded, and the other reason I got very upset is they gave $10,000 to anyone who gave a course on science and religion at university. And that was really the reason at the time that I got concerned, because I said that academics are certainly not principled, and that they are like pigs to the trough, and where there is money, academics will go. And you could see a profusion of courses around the country on religion and science, and you still can. And I have no problem with courses on religion and science if there's an intellectually interesting reason to have them. I have problems with courses on religion and science when there's no intellectually interesting reason to have them, and I would argue there is very little that's intellectually interesting at the interface between religion and science. The only reason these courses were happening was because there was money to fund them. And like many things, that's what's concerned many people, including myself, about the extensive funding that Templeton Foundation has done. Can it be misdirecting the academic community in ways, or encouraging them to go in directions that they wouldn't go in otherwise? Well, that's okay. I mean, if you're a foundation, you can encourage people to do anything. But the question is the end result good or bad for society and for science? And I want to leave you to think about that question. Now, more recently, the foundation has changed a lot, and I've been involved with interacting with the foundation. In fact, I co-taught a course at the Aspen Institute with a then head of the foundation's programs, Charles Harper, on science and religion, which was an interesting experience. And but the recent wording, if you look at the Templeton website, has changed from spiritual realities and progress in religion, and the old motto, which was Sir John's motto, how little we know, how eager to learn, the humble approach to learning, sounds good, has been changed to supporting science, investing in the big questions. The foundation has been trying to move, at least in the public's eyes and to some extent in the scientific community's eyes, as a science funding organism. And I'm excited and thrilled by that possibility. Anytime there's the possibility of infusing $2.5 billion into the study of science, I'm happy. And in fact, they have supported a number of programs that seem scientific. They've supported the World Science Festival, which I've lectured at every year, and I was on the board of that. They supported a program in physics called the Foundational Questions in Science Program, which gives out grants to people who do science. In my opinion, marginal science, but nevertheless science. And so it looks like a funding organization, a science funding organization. And if that were true, that would be great. One begins to worry when Charles was still the director, he just got removed a year ago, he argued that, very strongly, that quote, rigorous peer-reviewed science in certain areas can be engaged in as a form of theological significant research adventure. That's an interesting statement. So you can support peer-reviewed, rigorous science, which is what the Foundation intends to do. They have peer review panels. They support scientific programs. But it can be done as a form of theological significant research. And I don't know what that means. But maybe you can begin to wonder what it means when you look at the big questions that the Foundation has supported. Does the universe have a purpose? Does science make belief in God obsolete? Does evolution explain human nature? Now, these are interesting questions. Some of them are even, the latter one in particular is a scientific question. The former two, I think, are not. And in fact, I feel guilty. Well, I feel guilty every day. I was brought up that way. But because the very first public campaign that they had on big questions was on the question, does the universe have a purpose? And I actually was the first person that was asked to write a piece for a large advertisement with a number of scientists and philosophers in the New York Times and The Economist and several other places with the question, does the universe have a purpose? And when they asked me to do it, I said, will you censor what I have to say? And they said, no. And I thought, well, then this is a great way to really say something. So I wrote it down, and they didn't censor it at all. And then it was only afterwards that I kind of felt I got snookered. Because I realized that what this did, by having an ad like this all over the place, is it gave the public the impression that the question, does the universe have a purpose, is a big question. It's not a big question. Certainly not a big question for scientists. It's irrelevant. I've never in my entire life gone to a scientific meeting where that question has been raised. And by presenting that question as a key question that scientists discuss, which they may do after hours or when they're drinking, but by presenting it as a key question for science, you are misrepresenting the scientific enterprise. And I was a part of that, and I plead guilty. Now, hold on. I want to say, I don't know if someone in this room sent this to me. I just discovered it on my computer, and I as a result of the things that I presented, someone sent me this poem which said, you'd better get off your fanny. The Templeton crowd is quite canny. There is surface allure, but the motive ain't pure. Religion feels each nook and cranny. And I don't know if anyone was here in this group. I have to find out who to attribute this to. It wasn't in my email, or I'd know. I'd written it down from an email and put it in a document, and I neglected to say where I got it. But in any case, this is the worry that many people have, and many scientists have, and many people, including myself, have not taken money for our scientific research from the Templeton Foundation because of a concern about this. But I want to point out that it's not as if the Templeton Foundation is evil necessarily, or whether their intent is evil. The question is the process by which things are going on good for society? And that's the reason I presented the AAAS example as an example. Certainly the AAAS is an organization that's not evil necessarily and is interested in the promotion of science. But when they're induced to run programs like they did, the question is it good for society and is it good for science? And that's the thing I want to try and address. And a lot of this comes from what I would say the danger of conflating science and spirituality. The real problem, it seems to me, is that when one tries to openly promote the compatibility of science and religion, which itself I don't have a big problem with in certain ways, but when one tries to openly promote it, one automatically becomes hesitant, it seems to me, to call out nonsense. In fact, a lot of my thinking on this came from Sam Harris. I don't know if Sam's here. He and I, like Richard and I, have had many discussions that I found enlightened my own thinking. And I in many forums, because I spent a lot of my time going to fundamentalist colleges and trying to convince people that evolution is not evil, feel and felt that it was important to say that you don't have to be an atheist to believe in evolution. I think that's a true fact. It's not only do I think it's a true fact, it's a true fact because there are religious scientists who are evolutionary biologists. Whether it's more sensible to be an atheist is a different thing, but whether you were required is certainly not the case. And I would point out that in fact, the fact that, as I'll point out later, that science provides no evidence for purpose to the universe is not the same thing as saying there is no purpose to the universe. They're two different statements. And when scientists say the latter statement, I would agree with many in the religious community who say they're no longer being scientists. It is a scientific statement that there is no evidence of purpose in the universe. It is not quite a scientific statement to say there is therefore no purpose to the universe. I'll talk about what we mean when we say that statement in a bit, how to turn that into a scientific statement. And so I went around saying that, that science therefore is not incompatible with a belief in God, and I don't think it is. But Sam pointed out to me something which is very true. That's absolutely true, but it is incompatible with the doctrines of every major world religion. And if we don't recognize that fact and openly say it, then we're lying about science. And I say that to include Buddhism, which Sam I don't think is sufficiently hard on, as I'll talk about. But to give you an example of this problem, this is too long for you to read, but I'll read it, of this hesitancy to call out nonsense when you're interested in reaching out to the religious community. This is from a piece I wrote for Science Magazine. But every 2 years, the National Science Foundation produces a report, Science and Engineering Indicators, which I usually quote from when I want to surprise people about the scientific literacy of the public. It probes the public's understanding of science concepts. It's been a disappointing constant in these reports that U.S. adults are largely unwilling to accept the facts of evolution or the Big Bang, especially when compared with those in other first world countries. And I often quote for me what is the most egregious example of scientific illiteracy, which is every time they do that survey, every single year, 50% of the American public does not know that the Earth orbits the Sun and takes a year to do it. And I used to think that was a trick question, but it isn't. But every year they don't know that. So anyway, it's a disappointing thing. This year, however, the National Science Board, the major board of the government, the highest level ranking government science overseeing board, which oversees the National Science Foundation, chose to leave the section that discussed these issues out of the report because these issues, quote unquote, conflate knowledge and belief. So the survey was done and the data was there, but they didn't want to put it in the report because somehow it conflated knowledge and belief. In other words, they said if religious beliefs cause individuals to discard scientific evidence, it would be inappropriate to draw attention to this for fear of alienating the faithful. Science Magazine, by the way, did obtain the section, and it found, like every other year, that only 45% of U.S. respondents felt human beings developed from earlier species of animals, and only 33% agreed that the universe began with a Big Bang. But it's okay. It's okay to have that nonsense if it's religion that causes that nonsense. We shouldn't decry it. And the point that I've always said is that we should respect sensibilities, even religious sensibilities, unless they're wrong. Okay. This also causes people to speak out against those who would speak out against scientific nonsense. And the kindly Dalai Lama, who some people like but I'm not a big fan of, in a recent New York Times editorial, juxtaposed the statement that radical atheists issue blanket condemnations of those who hold religious beliefs with the censure of extreme intolerance, murderous actions, and religious hatred in the Middle East. Well, that sounds nice, except it's a ridiculous juxtaposition. Atheists don't cut people's heads off, murder families. Okay? They just, for the most part, just point out nonsense. And so it is, and that is somehow viewed as appropriate to say that the famous radical atheists, some of whom are in this room, are fundamentalists, like religious fundamentalists, and just as dangerous, is an inappropriate statement. And I think the statement is made because people try to accommodate religion by pointing out that there are some scientists that they disagree with, as well as some religious fundamentalists. Now, the real problem, though, for me with any of this is that I believe that science should be based on issues of truth and falsehood, particularly falsehood. And one of my favorite quotes, which comes from Richard Feynman, who I'm very interested in and I've always been a fan of, but particularly a fan of because my new book, which is available on Amazon.com, is a biography of Richard Feynman, coming out next March. But Feynman said many things, and one of my favorite quotes from Feynman is, "The only way to have real success in science is to describe the evidence very carefully, without regard to the way you feel it should be. If you have a theory, you must try and explain what's good about it and what's bad about it equally. In science, you learn a sort of standard integrity and honesty." And that's my real problem with a lot of this, and I want to, in the last part of this talk about why I have problems with conflating science and spirituality from the point of view of the habit of truth. The things that are not true are the fact that the big questions of the Templeton Foundation are big questions. They're simply not big questions for scientists. They're big questions for many people in society, and I don't deny that they're important questions that people like to think about, but to present them as big questions for science is not true. Treating science and religion as equals, as the dialogue on science, ethic, and religion, is not true. Science and religion are not equals, and by any standards. Religion may be more powerful in our modern society, but it demeans science to put it on an equal footing with religion. Science is responsible. Well, okay, go ahead. As I'll argue, science is not only responsible for our current well-being economically, it is responsible for our well-being ethically and morally. Equally important is the recognition that religion is irrelevant to science. It's not that religion is a adversary. It's not. It's just irrelevant. And this is the point I tried to make over and over again. I appeared, a number of my friends here in this room refused to appear, I think, when asked to be on a panel at the World Science Festival on Science and Religion, for many reasons, partly because it was sponsored by the Templeton Foundation at the time. But I agreed to be on with three religious people because I felt it was important, first of all, to have a scientist who wasn't religious on the panel. But secondly, to point out the simple statement that there was no reason to have this event at the World Science Festival. It was just inappropriate. It's irrelevant. Scientists don't discuss God in the laboratory, and in fact, as a famous biologist once said, when I go into the laboratory, I'm an atheist because I don't assume anything is going to be affecting the dials of my experiment. And so it's just irrelevant, and there's no need to talk about it as if it's relevant. Science, by the way, is relevant to religion. I lectured at an event, and I will say this, many years ago. It was a Templeton-sponsored event at the Vatican. I only agreed to go if they would not use my name in any of their promotional literature. And I went because my friend Martin Rees was organizing it. It was on the future of the universe, which is an area of research that I spend a lot of time thinking about. But we were talking about the far future of the universe, and they invited theologians, biologists, and some cosmologists to the event. And it was an interesting experience to be in the Vatican. But what I got up and said to them, with no malice intended, well, little malice intended, was a statement that they had to listen to me, but I didn't have to listen to them. And I meant it truthfully, because I think it's very important. Theologians, if they want to be sensible theologians, have to have some concept of how the world actually works. But scientists, to be sensible scientists, don't have to know anything about theology. Okay. The next thing is that there is no evidence for a purpose to the universe, as I said. And to present science as if it provides any evidence is, again, a lie. The other lie is that atheists are fundamentalists. The example I want to give, and because I also have a Star Trek hat, and I meet a lot of people who've been abducted by UFOs, and talk to them and get the same kind of blindsidedness in debates that I get with creationists. I want to use UFOs as an example. Scientists are atheists to the extent that scientists don't believe in UFOs. And the argument, and I'm going to quote Feynman again, a Feynman quote is, he said, "I find it easier to believe that UFOs are the result of the known irrationality of humans rather than the unknown rationality of aliens." But I think we can say the same thing about God. I personally, and many people in this room perhaps, find it easier to believe that a belief in God is based on the known irrationality of humans rather than the unknown rationality of a divine being. And that's not fundamentalism. In fact, what Feynman said is the reason I don't work on UFOs is that the preponderance of the evidence tells me everything I know about science tells me they're unlikely. And it's unlikely is the word. Physicists and scientists, more generally, don't not believe in anything, in principle, when they're doing science. They look at the data and they say what's highly likely and what's highly unlikely. That's all science can really do. And so when people say they're atheists, what they're saying is, it seems to me, when most scientists say they're atheists, is they look at everything they know about the world and find it incredibly implausible that there's a God. Not that they have some inner revelation that there's no God, or that they know it to be divinely true that there's no God, but rather that everything they know about the world makes it highly unlikely. And the example, again, not just of Feynman's UFOs, is Bertrand Russell's famous teapot. It's highly unlikely that there's a teapot orbiting the other side of the moon that we can't see. It's not impossible. But I'm not going to make a research grant to propose to look for it. And that's what atheism is. And it's a very different thing than fundamentalism. I'm happy to have applause. Why not? Okay. I want to conclude with talking about science and spirituality in the sense of, why I think that it does a disservice to... Well, the following is my key statement. I get offended by the claim that science needs religion to be spiritual. I accept spirituality. I think it's a key part of being human for most people. Not for everyone. I'm a very aspiritual person myself. But for many people, spirituality is a key part of their life, and I don't deny that, nor do I demean it. But I don't think science has to be supplemented by anything to be a key part of that spirituality. Science should be recognized as an essential part of establishing the human values that most people associate with their spirituality. We would be loath to define people as civilized whose ideas of justice and humanity had not evolved over the past 400 years since science has changed the playing field of the human intellect. That's the reason we're loath, that's the reason we find the Taliban so offensive. Because their minds are medieval. And we recognize that human values have changed, and the reason those human values have changed over the last 400 years is because of science. Good. This is all from the new book, so if you like it, it's good. The other thing that I find important in the sense of Feynman used to say, the easiest person to fool is yourself. So you always have to keep a watch if you're a scientist, because every time you do an experiment, if you get a weird result, you'll think it's significant. Which sometimes it's just an accident. And he gave many examples, and many distinguished scientists fell to his wrath as a result. And so we're hardwired. We are hardwired as human beings to believe that anything that happens to us is of special significance. And also that the way we feel things should be is the way they actually are. So it seems to me if we spend as much time trying to poke holes in our own myopia as we spend trying to validate our perceptions of the world and reality, the expanded worldview we get, which is what science does, could not help but produce both more socially harmonious world, but also a more fulfilling perspective of ourselves. Because ultimately, when we can't be honest to others, and that means understanding the way the world is, we can't be honest to ourselves. And we can't have any fundamental human values that are worth having if we're dishonest to ourselves, it seems to me. Don't applaud anymore, please. The final thing I want to say, and I'm sorry, if I'd had more time flying from the East Coast, which I did in the early hours of the morning, I would have written it this way, but I took it directly from my own writing. Science's habit of self-correction as a part of a continual effort to get a better handle on truth promotes a set of values that are essential for the health of modern democracy. To do good requires knowing the consequences of one's actions. No society, no group of humans can successfully address the challenges associated with promoting peace, happiness, and harmony without learning from experience what the challenges actually are and what the alternatives are for dealing with them. There are no inner revealed guidebooks for dealing with global warming, terrorism, or AIDS, because these challenges arise from a constantly changing world that only empirical investigation can uncover. So, this is the end. I'm coming to the last two slides. The problem with the open mind, and I've just spent 2 hours talking to the head of the Templeton Foundation the other day about trying to promote science. And they said, well, we have these peer-reviewed panels, and I said, yeah, and they have scientists on them, and they want to know if I might be on them. He said, the one thing we require, however, is an open mind. Which reminded me of one of my favorite quotes, which some of you have heard me say before, from the publisher of the New York Times, who said, I like keeping an open mind, but not so open that my brains fall out. But the point about it, what he meant by an open mind, is willing to accept the fact that science can promote spirituality and might promote enlightenment in terms of the nature of divine providence. The problem with requiring that open mind is it removes the possibility that the fundamental premise that science can reveal purpose is wrong. So that's the opposite of an open mind. You require people to accept this possibility when the possibility itself may be wrong. And I would argue, and this is my big problem with the Templeton Foundation, not that I think that they're well-motivated or necessarily, it's that I don't think any foundation can claim to be a scientific foundation if it does not operate under the fundamental scientific premise that preconceptions can be wrong. That's what differentiates science from religion. The fact that we can prove ourselves wrong. The fact that Feynman said we should spend an equal amount of time trying to prove ourselves wrong. An open mind allows for the possibility that Sir John's hope in creating the Templeton Foundation is fundamentally wrong. And if you refuse to accept that possibility, you can never appropriately fund science in the way it should be done. And the example I want to give is of the young man, I don't know if he's here, Ross, are you here? Okay, who was kind enough to pick me up at the airport late at night. And Ross pointed out to me that he came from a sort of a fundamentalist family, and like many people, perhaps in this room, got involved in this by skeptics by beginning to read some of their work and beginning to argue with some of them. And then he found out that their arguments were better than his. And so he changed his mind. And I said, that's really scientific of you, Ross. And then when we were talking, I thought, that's the point I want to make. The ability to change your mind about something as fundamental as purpose to the universe is what makes someone a scientist. And there is hope. I want to end with hope. The example I want to give is of the Gravity Research Foundation. Most of you probably haven't heard of the Gravity Research Foundation. It's a foundation that I'm happy to have won the first prize of many years ago. I'm happy to have won because it's now a real foundation. It began as a foundation for the study of anti-gravity. The founder, Charles Babson's son, had died in a plane crash. And he figured if we just had anti-gravity devices, we'd be fine. And for many years, it promoted a competition for the best essays on anti-gravity and how to develop an anti-gravity machine. It was a crackpot foundation, and if you read the greatest, one of my favorite books, Fads and Fallacies, Name of Science, by what's his name from Scientific American? What was his name? Who just died? Martin Gardner. It's a wonderful book to read. You'll find a whole chapter on the Gravity Research Foundation, which my friend Frank Wilczek gave me the day I won that prize. But it became a real prize, and the year it became a real prize, I remember, is when Stephen Hawking submitted a paper on black holes, and it won the award. And ever since then, it became a prize for the best essays on gravity. So you could turn foundations around. And I personally think It would be a pity for science, and certainly a pity for the Templeton Foundation, if we did not try and help it evolve in the same way. And that's why I can continue to maintain a dialogue with the Templeton Foundation. I may be pointless. I may be being used. I don't know. But it seems to me that it is possible that there are those in the foundation who would like it to be a scientific funding agency. And if we can fundamentally indicate that you can maintain the Sir John's legacy by separating the funding of science from the funding of religion, then it may be a good thing. So I would like all of you to think about your own efforts in that regard, and just end with another quote from Jacob Bernowski, which is another one of my favorite quotes. The world today is made, it is powered by science, and for any man to abdicate an interest in science is to walk with open eyes towards slavery. Thank you very much. Thank you. I did say I'd take a few questions if there are any. I guess there's a microphone. I usually like to take very few questions in public only because people have to pee. So I'll take a few and then you can go do what you need to do before the afternoon session.
I'd like to give you some food for thought. I'm not suggesting that you don't already have enough food for thought in your head. The first quote that you gave from Bernowski was, dream or nightmare, this is something we have to live with it. And I see that a lot of scientists have this very subtle fear that science has no purpose because they are usually thinking of problems like the moral responsibility and free will that we will not be able to defend very well because there is really no good evidence for that.
So there's a question here.
My question is that if one of the problems in science, the physicists don't spend enough time studying or reading the research that's going on in human brain and vice versa. I highly encourage you to spend some time, take some time out of your busy schedule to read the work of at least 20 well-reputable neuroscientists, which includes Francis Crick and his colleagues, Christoph, Ramachandran, Edelman.
Well, okay, you want me to read? I read neuroscientists.
What I'm saying is that there is a purpose within the human biology. It's pretty clear that morality emanates.
Okay, let me stop you for a second. Not because I know you're going nowhere, but because no, I think you have a point there. But let me just say that I think the issue of science and morality is a very important one. And let me plug something. We are the institute that I'm the director of is having an event that Sam Harris and Steve Pinker and a few other people will be at November 6th in Arizona, a big public event called The Great Debate, Can Science Tell Right from Wrong? It won't be live broadcast on the web, but it will be archived and available on the web if you go to our site. It's an incredibly important issue, and we will have associated with a conference of neuroscientists, evolutionary biologists, philosophers to discuss that issue. So it's an issue that I accept that it's very important, and it's an issue that I spend a lot of my own time lately thinking about. But I think I'll go to the other questioner if it's okay.
Thank you for a good talk.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Krauss, thank you very much. I've seen you a few times. I want to. I'm Don Lacey from Tucson, Arizona.
It's
just
near
down,
me. Yeah,
just down
the road. Yeah.
And I do have a question. There's an organization in Arizona called Arizona Origin Science Association.
Oh dear.
You're aware of this organization?
No, I'm not. I wanted to make myself blissfully ignorant for a couple of years, and I moved out of Ohio where I had to deal with all that. And I thought for a few years I'd try to ignore what was going on there in Arizona. But I'm sure, yes.
Well,
I do know, by the way, that one of the things I will say that I do know and I've written to the state senate about this in Arizona is one of the state senators, as you know, and you can go online and see this on YouTube. It's kind of embarrassing. At a hearing on radioactive waste disposal and the need to have safe sites in Arizona for that, pointed out that we really need to have safe, long-lived sites because the Earth was 6,000 years old, and we needed to have things live for at least that long. Anyway, go on.
Okay, well, it's good to make you aware of it because these folks, Russ Humphreys, have you heard that name?
Yeah.
They have a collection of scientists that they're bringing together to make their own peer review group to make it look real scientific. And they're going around the state to schools, and they're giving presentations. This is a young Earth creationist, Russ Humphreys. And if you're, I was going to ask what you're doing about
well,
these guys.
I'd rather not do anything. My own feeling about a lot of this is I'd rather not do anything about it unless they're having an impact. The same reason I don't debate a lot of UFO people and a lot of creationists is I'd rather not raise their profile unless they're having an impact. So if they have an impact, and in Ohio, the minute they had an impact on the state school board, I got involved, and I'm happy to say I won. So my own feeling is if they're a marginal group of idiots who are going around doing stupid things, and they're not having much of an impact, then I won't get involved. The minute they begin to have an impact in the state school boards or in the Congress, I'll be happy to get involved.
Well, I say they're having an impact.
Okay.
I saw these
Well,
gentlemen. Let me tell you the impact because it goes along with it. These gentlemen gave their presentation in the evening after they were spending the whole day in the school. This was a Christian school, talking about Noah's Ark and all that stuff. So they were teaching kids before they had this open forum down in Pima County. So.
Well, okay. Well, let's talk more about it. We'll see what's happening.
Hi, I'm Janet Factor from Springfield, Illinois.
Okay. Hi.
First of all, I want to thank you for using Bronowski so much. My own copy of Science and Human Values is on the desk in my room. And I'd sort of be interested to get together with you and see if we have underlined the same passages. But anyway.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. You can look at mine. It's heavily underlined.
I'm always trying to get people to read this book, and I have a very difficult time succeeding.
Well, just wait till my new one comes out, and then you can just have them read the updated version. Anyway.
I was curious, do you ever use the book in teaching?
No. Primarily because I teach... I use the ideas in the book in the sense that I try and teach kids how to think about the world, and I use the precepts that he enunciates, and I try and indicate that science is a cultural activity. But the courses I've taught up to this point are physics courses or courses most recently in Origins, where I try and teach kids about the science. So I use the ideas of Bronowski, but I haven't used it as a text because I haven't taught a course in the scientific method or science and society, and someday I may. Anyway, that's all. So I haven't used it. I just use it as a guide. Undoubtedly, it appears in everything I say in one way or another.
Thank you.
This has been a session from the Council for Secular Humanism's 30th Anniversary Conference in Los Angeles, featuring the luncheon presentation by Dr. Lawrence Krauss.
The original recording was engineered by Adam Isaac. Theme music was by Adam Fields. Post-production was by Inquiry Media Productions.
This has been episode 70. Visit us again on Center Stage. Center Stage is a production of the Center for Inquiry, a non-profit organization that seeks to foster a secular society based on science, reason, freedom of inquiry, and humanist values.
To learn more, visit our website at www.centerforinquiry.net.
Or visit our facilities and events in Amherst, New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and other cities.
Join us next time
on Center Stage.